Chapter 221, Hammer Boom. Boom, boom. Hawkeye's knuckles rapped steadily against the office door. The crisp sound rang down the quiet corridor. He paused, chest tight with a small, anxious flutter. He could practically hear his own heartbeat. A low, weary voice called, "Come in." He pushed the door open. The office was dim. A single desk lamp cast a pool of light over piles of documents. Fury sat behind the desk, half buried in paperwork. Only the furrow of his brow and the sharpness of his gaze betrayed that he was unsettled. Hawkeye stepped forward, trying to hide his nerves with measured expectation. "Sir, you wanted to see me?" "Oh, you're here." Fury lifted his head and gave him a quick once-over, as if sampling the man's condition. There was a sliver of curiosity in his eyes before he returned to his papers. "Take a look at the one on top." Hawkeye reached out, picked up a sheet, and flipped it open. His eyes widened. "Vampire?" he blurted. Wonder crept into his voice, the image of a showdown already forming in his head. Fury frowned. He snatched the document back as if something about it pricked him. He handed Hawkeye a different file, slightly annoyed. "You grabbed the wrong one. This is the one." Hawkeye blinked, flushed a little at the mistake, and opened the new file. His eyebrows shot up. "A hammer?" "This is no ordinary hammer, Barton." Fury's voice turned grave. "We tried everything short of explosives. We hooked a car to it and tried to drag it. It wouldn't budge. I think this is something else." Hawkeye felt a knot of unease tighten in his chest. He'd seen strange things. He'd grown used to the unexpected. But this felt different. He looked up at Fury. "You want me to check it out?" "Yes. Your skill set is important for this." Fury's tone was urgent now, the urgency of something that could spread if left unaddressed. Hawkeye hesitated. He couldn't ignore the recent shadows. Hydra hadn't been fully dismantled. Pierce's plan had failed on the surface, but it had been only the beginning. Hydra's tendrils still moved in the dark. "I don't know if that's a good idea. Hydra isn't finished with us yet." Fury softened just a fraction, understanding in his gaze. "I know, but we can't let another mystery fester. We need to find the truth, and if there's a threat, stop it." There was steel in his words. Hawkeye swallowed and let his training and responsibility win out over fear. "All right, I'll investigate the hammer." "Good." Relief flickered across Fury's face. "I'll get you everything you need. Support, assets. When can you leave?" "As soon as possible. You should go now." Under gray, churning skies, Hawkeye and a small SHIELD team raced toward the site. The air smelled of oncoming rain. The trees whipped in sudden gusts, as if warning of something unusual. Then a streak of light cut across the sky, a falling figure like a meteor. There was a loud crash. A car's headlights swung on, and in the headlights' glare, Jane Foster's sedan slammed into the man who'd fallen from the sky. Jane's heart leapt into her throat. She climbed out, shaking. "Daisy, he came out of nowhere." Her voice quivered. Daisy, her young assistant, half amused and half exasperated, muttered, "I can testify for you in court if you like." Jane moved closer, fearing he'd be hurt. But the man rose, dusted himself off, and seemed entirely unbothered by the collision. Under the car lights, he was impressive. Tall, solid, muscles honed by more than a lifetime of gym workouts. Blonde hair fluttered in the breeze. His face was rugged, arrogant in a way that made Jane's chest tighten. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, with an accent she couldn't place. "I am Thor, god of thunder, of Asgard. From which realm do you hail?" Jane and Daisy exchanged bewildered looks. Daisy rolled her eyes. "Great. You hit his head, and now he's amnesiac royalty. I'll be babysitting him forever." Jane, torn between scientist and caretaker, forced a steadier voice. "Lord, Thor, maybe we should get you checked out at the hospital." Thor frowned, offended at the doubt. Jane felt guilty. She didn't want to dismiss someone in obvious distress, even if he claimed divine origin. "All right, let's make sure you're all right." Somewhere else, in a smoke-choked conference room, Hydra's core members sat hunched around a long table. Dim light sifted through the haze, making ash-strewn surfaces look hard and tired. Cigarette butts overflowed the ashtray. The room smelled like worry and stale smoke. "Say something," Alvin snapped, slamming his fist down. "Do we go underground again, or do we hit SHIELD while they're vulnerable?" "Hit them," another man scoffed. "With what? We've been weakened." Alvin's temper flared. He remembered their old days, bold strikes and the illusion of power. "We've got superhumans on our side. We can't just cower forever." Another member sneered. bitter and cold. Those superheroes are nothing compared to Homelander. If he were on the field, we'd be finished. A thin, middle-aged man who had said little until now leaned forward. His voice was measured. Hydra's strength wasn't in direct confrontation. It was in endurance, in the pockets we kept hidden, and in intelligence. We should go back to lying low and rebuilding. Alvin bristled. So we ignore S.H.I.E.L.D.? We adapt. The older man's tone brooked no argument. The room fell into a cautious quiet, everyone balancing the urge to strike with the cold logic of survival. The peace shattered as the door was kicked open. A scaled figure stalked in, tall, muscled, with a reptilian presence that filled the room. Behind him came a hulking man framed by shadows. The room inhaled in collective dread. "Dr. Connors," someone gasped. "Kingpin," another whispered in equal parts fear and awe. Alvin's bravado faltered under the weight of those two entrances. Kingpin's gait was like a hammer. He scanned the room with a predator's appraisal, and when he spoke, his voice was low and absolute. "Pierce has been arrested. I am putting myself forward as leader of Hydra. Those in favor, whoever opposes me, will be dealt with." Silence fell like a curtain. For some, Kingpin's arrival promised ruthless direction. For others, it brought a chill of fear. Alvin, fueled by anger more than reason, barked, "Who do you think you are?" He never finished. From Dr. Connor's shoulder, a silver-gray tendril uncoiled with brutal efficiency. It transformed into a jagged spike. Before anyone could react, it plunged through Alvin's skull. Blood sprayed in a shocking, irreverent arc. The room smelled metallic and raw. Sobs and screams tried to rise, but were strangled by the new, palpable terror. It took a moment for reality to snap back into focus. The men staring at the scene understood, in the same instant, what resistance now meant: certain death. "I support him," someone muttered, voice small and hollow. Then another, voices aligning like rusted gears suddenly moving in the same direction. Kingpin allowed a thin smile as he took the chair Pierce had used. His eyes were ice. "Hiding makes you weak. We take the initiative. We hit them first. Our advantage is intelligence and control. Precision strikes, not brute force. With proper planning, we can take down these so-called heroes, one by one." He picked up a pen and, with a casual, cruel motion, skewered a photograph on the table. The pen's tip pierced into the printed eye of the target, Hawkeye. The black hole in the photo seemed to punctuate the finality of the moment. "We have intelligence that Barton will be sent out on a mission soon," Kingpin said. "He'll be exposed. Hydra will declare its war, and it begins with him." A chill slid through the room as that proclamation landed. In the dim, cigarette-scarred space, a new order closed like a fist around Hydra's battered heart. End of chapter. Chapter 222. New system. "Get out of here, Tony Stark! You thief!" The shout rolled down the street like thunder, stopping pedestrians in their tracks. At the entrance to Stark Tower, a man in strange combat gear stood framed by sunlight, two crackling electric whips coiled in his hands. His face was shadowed, his eyes wild with fanaticism and fury. With a roar, he lashed out, the whip arcing like lightning and shearing a nearby sculpture in half. Stone fragments flew, leaving black scorch marks on the plaza like reminders of brutality. "Call the police! Now!" Happy's voice snapped as he barked orders to his security team. He forced himself to stay composed, but his hands shook. Tony Stark was their boss, their hero. Nobody was going to hurt him if Happy could stop it. The men moved in, adrenaline making them faster, more determined. But before they could reach the attacker, two blazing streaks tore across the sky. They struck the electric whip with surgical precision. There was a thunderous explosion. The assailant was thrown back, tumbling like a meteor before slamming into the pavement and kicking up a cloud of dust. People looked up. A red blur crossed the sky and hung in the air like a god descending. "Is that Homelander?" A security guard blurted, unable to hide the relief in his voice. "It's really him." Relief swept through the crowd. With Homelander on the scene, they felt safe. Happy scowled at the celebration. "Don't get carried away," he ordered, though his shoulders eased. "Tie him up. Turn him over to the police." The men moved fast, restraining the unconscious attacker before he could cause any more damage. Happy shook his head as he picked up his phone to report to Tony. He received no answer. Whatever relief the intervention brought was tinged with uncertainty. Above the city, however, Homelander Harry wasn't lingering to be thanked. He flew away from the tower toward the heart of the city where death had left a blackened wound. He hovered over the radiation zone of the nuclear blast and stared down at the ruined swath of New York. Once bustling streets were piles of ash and twisted metal. The city he had pledged to protect looked like a painting of grief. His face was expressionless, but inside he felt something heavy and raw. Pride and shame tangled together. He had spent his life being the country's guardian. Yet here, surveying the devastation, he felt helpless. A soft buzz in his ear cut through the silence. The communicator. A calm female voice, steady and gentle, slid into the quiet like a breeze. Homelander, Chairman Osborn requests you return to the office. At the word chairman, heat returned to Harry's chest. Norman Osborn had always been more than his father. At crucial times, Norman's support had been Harry's anchor. He's looking for me? Harry asked into the communicator, trying to keep his voice even. Yes, he said it's urgent. Harry hesitated one last time over the ruined city, then turned. With a streak of red light, he vanished over the skyline. Back at the Osborn offices, Norman's desk sagged under piles of reports and reconstruction plans. He sat hunched, jaw tight, the fine lines by his eyes deepened from exhaustion. When Harry entered, Norman didn't rise. He only nodded toward the empty chair across from him. Sit, Norman said. His voice was low and frayed. The sight of his father like this made something ache inside Harry. Norman clasped his hands together and met Harry's gaze. Are you all right? Harry forced a steady tone. I'm fine. Norman's next words were blunt and painful. Because of Kingpin's threat, I had to wake you up, make you the host for the symbiote. I planned further tests first. Regret shadowed his face. We thought an embryonic stage symbiote would be easier to control, but it took hold of you. You suffered, Harry. We almost lost you. Harry's memory flared, the agony of the implantation, the way something alien in his veins had tried to seize him. He swallowed. I'm okay, Dad. I can control it. Carnage, massacre, won't act recklessly. The name slipped out clumsily. Norman's eyes darkened. He said simply, you have to be careful. If you lose control, the damage would be catastrophic. Something else echoed in Harry's mind then, a soft, hungry whisper that had been there since the symbiote integrated. It tasted of red, of bloodlust and power. Hey, it crooned, don't listen to old men. Together we are invincible. We can do anything. Kill all the bad guys. I will help you. Harry wore a calm face, but the whisper scraped at him. He answered aloud, I understand. I'll be careful. Norman nodded, but he didn't look convinced. Before more could be said, the office door opened and Ben and Jessica walked in. Jessica still wore her black cat ear headband and that half smile of hers. Ben, Uncle Ben to some folks, looked around with the careful, steady gaze that made people feel safer. After small talk, Norman straightened and cleared his throat. The fatigue in his posture was replaced by a leader's focus. Harry's back, he began, but our Patriot Alliance is too small. If we face everything that's coming, we're spread too thin. We can't afford another disaster like the last. We need more people, he continued. To do that, we have to change the system. Heroes will be graded S, A, B, C. S-class handle the worst threats. Lower classes handle lesser incidents. Ordinary crimes should be settled by lower-tier heroes so we don't waste our top resources. Ben exchanged a look with Jessica. Becoming a superhero takes ability, he said. We can't throw civilians into danger. I know, Norman replied. That's why the Alliance will recruit professionals, paid heroes, full-time. They'll be trained, equipped, and held to standards. We need double-digit membership as a minimum. Harry bristled inwardly at the thought of some of their replacements being less capable, but he saw the logic too. If the Alliance was to be effective, it needed numbers and structure. Jessica shrugged nonchalantly, though she looked intrigued. A paid position? Could attract some real talent, she said. Ben nodded, cautious but hopeful. Norman leaned forward, eyes bright. This isn't just about wages. It's a new beginning, a steady force, accountable and dependable. Discussion flared then, earnest and heated in turns. Strategies, recruitment plans, training regimens, ideas traded like weapons. As Norman outlined his vision of a disciplined, classed Patriot Alliance and the bureaucracy that would support it, Harry found himself relaxing. Maybe this was the chance to find allies, to build a team that could shoulder the burden instead of carrying it alone. Outside, in the ruined city, lights blinked far below. In a darkened cave beneath the rubble, small pinpricks of light watched and waited like animal eyes. Plans whispered in the shadows. But in the office, for the first time since the blast, a plan for rebuilding had taken shape. One that might, if they could pull it off, keep the city from burning again. Chapter 223, Thor's Hammer. Thor woke slowly in a small-town hospital. White walls swam in front of his eyes. A cold ceiling loomed overhead and the bright lights made him squint. It was quiet, save for distant whispers and hurried footsteps. The antiseptic tang in the air made him uncomfortable. He tried to move and found himself restrained, as if bound. Having lost his divine power, he couldn't break free no matter how hard he struggled. An invisible force seemed to press against him. Anger and helplessness burned together in him. He could not bear the humiliation. "Hey, Thor, calm down," Jane said softly, a breeze over a storm. She stood beside the bed, face strained. While helping the doctor hold him, she kept her voice gentle. "You promised me. Trust me. I'm trying to help." "Trust you? You lied." Thor's voice thundered, raw with fury. Memory after memory surged back, and he saw the truth of his situation. "You said you'd help me get back to Asgard." Jane's expression flickered with helplessness. Seeing the pain and anger on his face made her chest tighten. "I didn't lie. I will take you back to Asgard, but I have to heal your body first." "My body? There's nothing wrong with my body." Thor spat, insolent and wounded. He could not accept that the god of thunder had fallen so low. A nurse slipped up to the bed with a syringe, hesitation written on her face. Before he could react, she injected an anesthetic. The pull of sleep took him instantly, and he slumped back onto the pillow. "Sorry, I was afraid he might break free," the nurse murmured, nervous. "You did the right thing," the doctor said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We'll run a battery of tests. It'll take some time." Jane sat in the waiting room, frustrated and bewildered. What exactly was Thor's identity? Where was this Asgard he kept claiming? Back at the hotel, her assistant Daisy burst in, eyes wide with excitement. "Come look," Daisy said. "We took pictures during the storm last night. Some show a figure." Jane hurried over. The photos captured the tempest, dark rolling clouds and forked lightning. But in several frames, a tall silhouette stood faintly against the sky. Could Thor really be who he says he is? The god of thunder? Jane's rational mind fought to accept what she saw. Everything about him, his voice, his bearing, the strange aura she'd sensed, had hinted at something beyond ordinary. A new determination took root in her. If Thor was truly what he claimed, she had to help him. The next morning, she went back to the hospital, heart full of apprehension. Sunlight warmed the white corridor, and she almost convinced herself everything would be simple. The doctor met her at the door with an expression she couldn't read. Then relief and wonder lit his face. "There's nothing physically wrong with him," he said. "He's in exceptional condition, far beyond a normal human." Jane felt as if the ground shifted under her feet. She had always lived by science and reason. Now, everything she believed seemed to tilt. Still, she pushed her surprise down and asked the question that had been burning in her. When she finally sat by Thor's bedside and asked him to tell his story, his smile was slow, proud. "I didn't lie," he said. "I am Prince of Asgard, destined to be king. But a few days ago I made a mistake." He spoke haltingly at first, then the years of myth and battle unspooled from his lips, the friendship with his brothers, the clashes with the frost giants. For a moment, the fluorescent hospital room melted, and Jane saw golden halls and banners, the bright, unearthly light of a palace. She listened, rapt. Afterwards, they left the hospital and went to a small restaurant for a quiet meal. As they ate, Jane overheard two men at a nearby table talking about an iron hammer no one could lift. Thor's eyes lit up with something like worship. His face brightened, and a fire returned to him. "That's my weapon, my hammer," he said, voice trembling with hope. "If I can get that artifact back, I can return to Asgard and finish what I must." Jane felt that hope grow inside her. She was no longer just an observer. She wanted to help him reclaim that piece of himself. "Then let's find it," she said with a steady look. They drove toward the location the men had mentioned, a site a few dozen kilometers from town. The sun slid toward the horizon, bathing the landscape in gold. Jane drove while Thor kept glancing at the distant hills, anxious and tense. "Are we almost there?" he asked. The yearning in his voice was almost painful. Almost, Jane replied. We'll be walking the last stretch. But when they arrived, the scene sickened her. A temporary military camp had been erected where the landing site had been quiet only hours before. White tents glittered in the sunset. Checkpoints ringed the perimeter, and soldiers in camouflage scanned every vehicle. What's going on up ahead? Jane asked casually, though dread tightened her stomach. The area's a restricted military zone now, a soldier said flatly. You'll need to take a detour. Jane swallowed. This road was the only way to the Hammer. She reversed, then pulled into a side lane a short distance later and stopped. Let me out, Thor demanded. I can feel it in there. I can't just walk away. Calm down, Jane said, firm. She knew that without his powers he didn't stand a chance against trained troops. Still, she also felt how much the Hammer meant to him. Identity, power, destiny. After a long breath, she relented. All right, she said softly, opening the door. Be careful. Don't be reckless. Thor's smile was both stubborn and grateful. Thank you. Once I have the Hammer, I'll be what I was and go home. Night fell, and the camp became a web of lights and shadows. Thor slipped into the darkness, moving with the quiet surety of someone who had been trained in other kinds of battle. He kept to cover and probed for a weakness in the defenses. But the human forces were not easy to fool. Unseen by Thor, the camp's commander, Hawkeye, watched surveillance monitors with cold attention. A glint of something like amusement crossed his face. Get a team together. Move in. Bring him in alive. Maybe he knows something, Hawkeye said. The agents moved like hounds through the dark, and soon Thor realized he had walked into a ring of men. He grinned, not with surprise, but with the grim joy of combat. He launched himself into them, fast, brutal, precise. Even without his thunder, his physique and training made him more than a match for ordinary soldiers. He toppled the first man with a single thunderous blow, ducked and weaved through another charge, and pushed forward. The camp fought back hard, but their tactics and weapons could not entirely blunt Thor's ferocity. He was a force of nature, driving through flares and tents, leaving stunned and broken agents behind. Night wrapped and swallowed the sounds of the scuffle, but Thor pressed on, every step bringing him closer to what he'd come for. At last, in the deepest section of the camp, under a cluster of canvas and floodlights, Thor paused and lifted his head. There it was, the Hammer, unmistakable even wrapped in straps and guarded in the center of the tent. Mjolnir, he breathed, though he called it by many names in his mind. Thor's hammer. Here I come. End of chapter. Chapter 224, Loki. In the center of the spacious tent, a silver hammer stood planted in the earth, catching the light and flashing like a beacon. Thor pushed aside the curtain, and his eyes locked on it, as if on a long-lost lover. The sight took his breath away. For a moment he forgot everything else. This was his hammer, his pride and his proof, and joy rose in him like a tide. A wide smile broke across his face. He laughed aloud, the sound echoing in the empty canvas. Above him, on an iron ladder, Hawkeye watched from the shadows. He held his bow ready, fingertips rubbing the string, poised to fire on a moment's notice. He had no intention of letting Thor go until he knew what the hammer would do. Would Thor be able to lift it? He would see. Thor swallowed and tried to steady himself. He reached out, took hold of the handle with a firm, hopeful grip, and pulled. The hammer did not budge. He released it, convinced he had not tried hard enough. He shook his head, gathered himself, and gripped it again, this time pouring everything into the motion. His face tensed, beads of sweat gathered on his brow. Hope and dread warred in his chest. Still nothing. The hammer remained rooted to the ground like an immovable mountain. The smile on Thor's face froze. The joy that had flooded him was torn away by a cold, impossible reality. His fingers trembled. A raw, wordless anguish welled up inside him, an ache that felt like the loss of something essential. He tried to force the breath out of his lungs, but it came as a choke. No, he finally cried, his voice breaking with pain. To be unable to lift his hammer meant more than losing a weapon. It was the final, humbling verdict from a father he had failed. Odin's disappointment felt absolute. The prospect of ever returning to Asgard, of reclaiming his place, vanished into a terrible, sinking nothing. Hawkeye watched with an impassive stare. When Thor collapsed into silence, Hawkeye signaled to the agents nearby. They moved in and bound him. Thor offered no resistance. The fight had already left him. The agents led him to a locked tent and left him there, gaunt and numb with grief. While the agents worked, a figure materialized beside the hammer, and the air around him seemed to chill. Strange, invisible, and unremarked by all but one, Loki had slipped into the tent. His face was delicate and sharp at once, his hair a rumpled halo around his head, his eyes dark with scheming. He let his gaze settle on the hammer and felt a pulse of something he couldn't quite name, more than envy, more than curiosity. It was as if the hammer represented not only Thor's authority, but a deeper claim on his brother's soul. Should he try it? Loki wondered. He reached out and closed his fingers around the handle. Cold and weight slid into his palm. For a moment his chest clenched with expectation. Then, like Thor, he found the hammer immobile. He let it fall back to the earth and snorted with contempt. He had never cared for blunt instruments. He had always preferred cunning and illusion. After all, it had been his schemes that had sent Thor packing to the mortal world. Now he had come, he thought darkly, to finish what mischief he had begun. Loki allowed the illusion that had cloaked him to slip away and stepped fully into the light beside Thor. He let a small, private smile curl the corner of his mouth. "My stupid brother," he murmured under his breath, amused and affectionate at once. Before they could exchange more, the hush of the encampment was shattered by hurried footsteps and voices. A group of figures emerged from the darkness. Their leader was a tall, gaunt man, the one known as Dr. Lizard, who had allied himself with the symbiote Riot. Behind him moved 4 super agents, men injected with Hydra's version of a Superman serum, silent and lethal. They had come under Kingpin's orders, make the first strike against S.H.I.E.L.D. and take Hawkeye out. Dr. Lizard's mouth curved into a cruel smile. "Do it," he ordered, his voice cold as a blade. The 4 agents melted into the night and leapt the camp fence as easily as shadows. From a distance, Dr. Lizard watched with the confident cruelty of a man who expected victory. But instead of the sounds of a skirmish, an eerie silence answered him. The agents vanished almost at once. No cries, no gunfire, nothing. Only a fog began to roll in, thick and unnatural, swallowing the tent lights and stealing the edges from everything it touched. A chill ran down Dr. Lizard's spine. He knew what those agents could do. Even he would not have been foolish enough to bet against them. How could ordinary camp guards have neutralized them in a single breath? "Something's wrong," Riot's voice whispered in his mind, a tight, alien hiss. A gray mist rose between Dr. Lizard and the camp, and for an instant he felt a memory clawing at him, images from the night his body had first been betrayed and remade into something else. He had almost died that night, drawn by a force he couldn't name. He swallowed hard, the old dread surfacing. Could fate be repeating itself? The fog thinned to reveal a narrow passage he had not seen before. Its gray walls were mottled and worn, like ancient scars. The sight made his pulse stutter. He reached out to touch the stone. Ice bit at his fingertips as if the stones exhaled cold. Before he could pull back, pale human arms, countless, slick and wrong, slid out of the walls and wrapped around him. They clutched his wrists like hands from a grave, fingers cold and tight, leaving black prints on his scaly skin. "Get off me," he barked, wrenching and fighting. The arms would not release. Images flooded him, the broken faces of the test subjects he had abandoned, eyes that accused and pleaded and burned with a sorrow that washed over him like acid. Guilt, long into the past, rose up and choked him. There was no escape, it seemed, from the gray fog's judgment. "I won't die this way," Dr. Lizard snarled, and bit down on panic. He remembered how, once before, the only way out had been to face the thing that haunted him. He forced himself to move forward, each step measured, each breath a sharp command. He would not run. Not yet. Loki, in another fragment of the same strange fog, found himself standing in a similar corridor. The stone on either side of him was etched with ancient runes that crawled beneath his gaze like living script. The atmosphere was thick, heavy with an oppressive sorrow that pressed at his lungs. He had come prepared to lie to his brother, to tell him Odin was dead and the throne within his reach. Instead, the world buckled, and a tide of gray swallowed him whole. He was the #1 mage of the 9 realms. No one should have been able to trap him so easily. He closed his eyes and reached for the currents of magic, trying to map the strange signatures around him. But the walls themselves pulsed with resentment, a stench of negative energy that sought to smother him. Loki's swagger faltered. If this was a trick, it was not one he fully understood. He walked, because walking felt better than standing, and because even he knew one must move toward a solution. At the end of the passage, a faint light flickered, and his pulse quickened with reluctant curiosity. He told himself not to be afraid. He had faced terrifying things before. What could be so powerful as to subdue him? The corridor opened into a circular hall, dazzling and impossible. Gemstones were set into its walls, scattering light into strange patterns. In the center sat a figure on a throne, draped in a black robe. The face beneath the hood was blurred, like a smear of shadow. The voice that spoke from that darkness was deep and hoarse, as if it came up from a forgotten well. "Welcome, Loki." The name loosened something cold inside him. He tried to keep his tone steady. "Who are you?" "I am an ancient being who governs time and space," the figure answered. It stood slowly, its presence vast and folding in on itself. "You have been chosen to play a game of destiny." "A game?" Loki's lips curled with contempt that did not reach his eyes. Something in the offer touched a nerve. Ivanry, he'd always loved a contest, a match of minds or wills. But his pride flared into suspicion. "Why should I obey you?" "Because you have no choice," the dark voice said, and offered a smile that smelled of cruelty. "In this game, you must face your deepest fears and desires. Only by conquering them can you find the way back. Win, and you will be rewarded beyond imagining." The words pressed on Loki like an invisible hand tightening. Images flashed through his mind, failures he had hidden, betrayals he had staged, every sting he had ever felt. Yet under the skin of dread, something else sparked, a stubborn, defiant heat. He had never bent easily, and he would not do so now. "I will not yield," he said, a promise as much to himself as an oath. The hooded figure's smile widened. "Excellent. I admire your spirit." With a lazy, terrible gesture, the figure swept its hand through the air. The hall began to twist, angles melting into one another. Time itself seemed to fold as the gemstone's light threaded into bands that wrapped around Loki. The runes on the walls hummed and pulsed. For a moment, all thought vanished, and a brilliant white light swallowed him whole. Chapter 225 Maze. A sudden flash of light made Loki's heart lurch. He squinted and saw the man in the black robe vanish, as if swallowed by an endless void. In his place hung a blinding orb of light, hot and brilliant as a sun, burning directly into his eyes. A flood of information poured into his mind, too fast and loud to ignore. Main God space. Go to other worlds to complete missions. Earn points that can be traded for rare items or power. Possibilities unfolded like tides. As the messages resolved into meaning, the dread that had shadowed Loki's face melted away, replaced by a bright smile. Excitement sparked in his eyes. A long-buried confidence surged through him. For years he'd been at the mercy of Thor's fists, beaten and humiliated because he lacked the strength to stand his ground. Now, finally, the chance was here. If brute force could solve everything, why bother with schemes and subtlety? This was his chance, he decided, and with that resolve, he stepped into the infinite. His first mission took him to a world that felt drawn from legend, an age of wizards, hobbits, and rings. Loki cloaked himself as a traveling stranger and shadowed Gandalf in white, only to strike on a moonless, windy night. He took the one ring from a hobbit's finger, felt the rush of mastery flood him, and imagined himself ruler of a world torn between light and shadow. He schemed against Sauron and pictured endless power and riches. The second mission dropped him into a planet of metal and war, Transformers tearing their world apart. Loki watched and stoked the flames until the factions turned on each other. He acted like a director, guiding disaster, taking advantage of the chaos to seize more power while the world smoldered. Episode after episode, his strength grew. 10 years slipped by like a blink. Dozens of reincarnations and countless missions later, Loki emerged the strongest being within the main god space. He and others breached its confines and returned to the real world, and he went straight to Asgard. Face to face with Odin, Loki struck without hesitation. The god of mischief came like a storm. He defeated Odin, humiliated Thor, and took his place on the throne, laughter booming through the palace. He reveled in the sight of gods bowing at his feet, in the stunned anger on his brother's face. Everything felt inevitable. "See, I am the strongest," he crowed. But just then, Thor's voice cut through the triumph like a blade. Hey, Loki, wake up! Wake up now! The shout was a splinter in his joy. What? I'm awake. What do you want, you? Loki snapped, confused and irritable. Before his words finished, a sharp sting exploded across his cheek as if he'd been struck. Stars swam across his vision. Panic rose. He grasped at the throne, at power, at the scene of his victory, and everything dissolved like a dream. When his eyes opened, there was no throne, no Odin, no reverent gods, only Thor's worried face looming over him. Thor? Loki's voice trembled. He fumbled for memories, but they were hazy and insubstantial. Thank the gods you finally woke up, Thor said, relief softening his features. The warmth in his voice eased some of Loki's fear. Loki tried to move. He found his body pressed against a living, gray wall. It felt suffocating, a mass of writhing arms and tendrils that clutched him as if intending to drag him into a bottomless dark. The wall tightened, cold fingers seeming to close around his throat. Despair and raw anxiety coiled in his chest. Had everything, his triumph, his power, been only a hallucination? If Thor hadn't grabbed me, I would have been swallowed, Loki realized, voice small and disbelieving. What are you still doing? Get out of there! Thor shouted, panic finally breaking through his calm. He strained at something Loki couldn't see, but his divine power was gone. He could only rely on his hands. Loki felt his body sink deeper into the wall's clinging grip. Fear sharpened into action. Loki poured his magic into a single furious effort. His spell lashed out like a storm, tearing away the twisted arms that held him. The force flung Thor backward. He hit the ground hard. Gasping, Loki staggered free. He watched Thor struggle to his feet, chest heaving. A moment's hesitation flickered through Loki. Anger, the old instinct to kill, but he pushed it aside. The situation was too strange, too uncertain. Better to keep Thor alive, he thought. At a critical moment, his brother might be useful as bait or distraction. You idiot, you almost killed me, Thor panted, more frustrated than hurt. Have you forgotten I don't have my divinity anymore? I'm just mortal. Loki wiped the spit from his lip, something like guilt or calculation stirring. He forced a half smile and asked, Do you know where we are? Thor frowned, helpless. How would I know? Loki considered Thor's blunt mind and smirked inwardly. It feels like a maze, Thor said after a moment, then looked up. A labyrinth, maybe. There are probably others trapped here too. Let's go find them. All right, Loki said. He wasn't convinced. How could anyone be in a place like this? But dithering would accomplish nothing. Action was their only hope. Together they stood amid towering alien walls. Shadowy figures drifted just beyond sight, like eyes tracking their every move. We must find the exit, Loki whispered, forcing courage into his voice. Thor fell in beside him, and they began walking. The hush of the place made every footstep sound loud and final. With each turn, the maze seemed to close tighter, the air growing thicker. Thor broke the silence. Do you feel it? Like something is calling us. Power? Loki asked. He felt it too, an ancient seductive tug. Some old magic, Thor said, eyes distant with unease. Loki could imagine what it would be, temptation designed to trap careless souls. Ignore it, he advised. They pushed on. The walls darkened, the air soured. Loki sensed dozens of unseen gazes. Both gods' resolve hardened. If there were others inside, they needed to find them before whatever this place was could pick them off. Far down another corridor, Hawkeye moved with a hunter's caution. He'd awoken in a different stretch of the labyrinth and had seen no other living person. The passages forked and looped like a web. His breaths came quick and shallow. His supplies were dwindling. He had to conserve strength if he wanted to find an exit. While he studied the stone, something eerie caught his eye. Faint faces, like damp stains, coalescing in the bricks. Faces he knew. Agents under his command. He blinked, shook his head. The labyrinth played tricks. A sharp, slicing sound split the air. Hawkeye's body froze and then lunged back as a black shadow darted from a corner and struck the wall with a dull thud. He narrowed his eyes, searching the gloom. A long, silver-gray chain weapon materialized, its barbs glinting. The sight sent a chill through him. A symbiote riot, a predator from darker days, something that had once terrorized the Osborn building. Information flared up in his head, cold facts about its strength and ferocity. Riot, he said, forcing the name as a warning. The figure stepping from the shadow was tall and terrible, face twisted with hunger. Oh, of course I'm going to kill you, the rioter said, voice low and hungry. A cruel smile slit his mouth. Hawkeye tried reason. It's dangerous here. Wait until we get out. Humph, no need for that. Riot lunged like a beast. Hawkeye set his arrow and let it fly. The projectile arced cleanly, but Riot moved aside and the arrow slammed into the wall. It detonated on impact, erupting in a flare of blinding fire that licked at the corridor. The heat rolled outward. A monstrous roar followed as stone trembled and dust fell. Hawkeye stood frozen, heart pounding. He realized with a cold certainty that he had triggered something he could not control. The maze was responding, and now it was awake. Chapter 226, Monster Boom. Boom, boom. The corridor seemed to convulse with each thunderous impact. Lime dust rained down from the ceiling, filling the air with a bitter metallic tang. Stone slabs along the walls rattled and ground against one another with high, keening squeals, like 1,000 trapped voices wailing. Hawkeye pressed his hands over his ears, trying to stop the panic that clawed at his chest. His heartbeat was a war drum in his throat, each pounding beat a countdown to something terrible. He drew a slow breath, feeling the vibration through his ribs, and scanned the warped, unfamiliar passage for an escape. The sound made the world tilt. Everything looked distorted. He clenched his teeth against the tinnitus until he couldn't keep it together. The silver-gray slime that had coated the corridor peeled back like a tide, revealing Dr. Lizard's face, pale, gaunt, and stricken. Dr. Lizard's eyes were narrow, calculating. There was a war inside him between instinct to flee and a scientist's stubborn need to measure the threat. Forget it, he thought. I can't fight him here. This place is wrong. But then his gaze snapped to the tunnel they'd come from. A new, cold aura crept in from that direction, an icy, slicing presence that made his spine rattle. Heavy footsteps came like thunder, shaking the corridor. A shapeless mass poured out of the gray fog, a thing built from dozens of corpses, stitched and fused together. Rotten flesh hung in shreds. A reek of decay rolled off it. Heads twisted at unnatural angles, white bone exposed where mouths had been torn away. Empty sockets gaped, hunting. Its maw opened to reveal jagged animal teeth, and a guttural, low roar announced its arrival. Go, Hawkeye barked when he understood at once that this was no enemy to be taken on. He pivoted and sprinted toward another passage, but Dr. Lizard was rooted in terror, his limbs refusing to obey. I can't just give up, he told himself, struggling against the paralysis. He felt the panic swell, but beneath it a thin ember of fight lit. He wrenched his body free of fear's grip and shoved off in Hawkeye's direction, legs suddenly finding purchase. The monster unleashed a roar that hit them like a storm surge. The sound wave was physical, an invisible wall that slammed into them. Dr. Lizard felt a hot spike of pain in his ear and tasted blood. Crimson tracked down his chin and splattered onto the floor. Hawkeye fared worse. The blow folded him in half. He spat another mouthful of blood into the dust. Only the experimental serum coursing through him kept his lungs from collapsing. Otherwise, he would have died from the force alone. Dazed, they were hurled into the wall. Dr. Lizard's back slammed against cold concrete. A harsh groan escaped him. From the walls, strange, sinewy arms, like the grasping feelers of some living thing, sensed their breathing and uncoiled. They shot out, striking like a nest of poisonous snakes. Hurry, it's coming, Hawkeye shouted, breath ragged. Despair tried to take hold, but he found a reserve of stubborn fight. He yanked an explosive arrow from his quiver, rolling it along the shaft with his finger to feel its weight. He jammed the point against the wall at his back and, with a practiced throw, sent it home. Fire and concussive force erupted. Hands that had lashed out were blown to pieces. Limbs and smoke filled the corridor. The blast freed Hawkeye. He scrambled up, blood trickling from his lips, and ran. Relief was fleeting. The monster had been staggered, not stopped. Hawkeye kept firing explosive arrows behind them to buy time, little flares of destruction that rained on the pursuing horror. Each time the beast roared, the shockwave made their wounds throb as if an unseen fist squeezed their throats. We can't stop, Dr. Lizard panted, fear sharpened into resolve. Memories flashed through him, failed experiments, colleagues lost, nights spent in cold, fluorescent light. Each image turned his dread into something like steel. I know, Hawkeye answered, voice raw but steady. His eyes were bright. Whatever lay ahead, he refused to back down. A sliver of light appeared ahead, warm, promising. They both saw it like an oasis in a nightmare. Wordlessly, the two men fell into step. Together, they charged toward the brightness, every step a defiance. The monster still thundered behind them, closing fast, and pain throbbed in their limbs, but the promise of a door kept them moving. As they neared the exit, the beast roared once more, a sound that ripped at the air. Dr. Thap Lizard's hands clenched. Hawkeye notched a final explosive arrow, drew, and aimed at the dark mass. "Go to hell," he breathed, and the arrow flew. Whoosh, boom. The concussion rolled through the passage like thunder. Far off, through the thick gray fog, the sound reached other ears. Loki squinted into the haze. A flash of red flared in the fog, like a burning ember, warning him. Something terrible is coming, he told himself. His instincts had never been wrong. That scent in the air was wrong in the deepest way. "Then we have to get over there now," Thor said, voice urgent. "Someone's fighting it. People need help." He grabbed for Loki to pull him toward the noise, a warrior's certainty sparking in him. Loki's hand was not there to be held. The figure he'd expected coalesced into nothing, a wisp of green smoke. For a moment, Loki smiled thinly, a sneer of calculation. "Hey, Loki, you're heading the wrong way," Thor called as he turned, only to see Loki moving away in the opposite direction, voice light and mocking. "No, I'm sure I'm right," Loki replied. "While the monster is occupied, we should get out, quickly." "You want to run?" Thor snapped, anger and disappointment cracking through him. The brothers' bond frayed in an instant. Thor's choice was obvious to him, to run into the heart of danger and fight. Loki's, whatever its reasons, felt like cowardice. Coward? Loki watched Thor's broad back shrink into the fog. Conflicting feelings rose in him. Thor's courage and persistence were things he both envied and despised. He muttered under his breath, "A wise man chooses survival. You have no idea how terrible that thing is." Thor pushed through the smoke toward the explosions. When the fog thinned, the scene stopped him cold. Several figures were embroiled in a desperate fight. The air stung with cordite and iron, and the monster at the center of it all made even Thor pause. It was grotesque, an immense mass of fused human remains, mottled skin like rotten bark, a fetid stench so strong it made his stomach lurch. The creature's eyes were wild, hunting thing. "What the hell is that?" Thor muttered, hand tightening on his weapon. He'd seen horrors across worlds, but this was something else. Its roar hammered his eardrums, but he forced himself forward. As shield, agents had formed a defensive ring, firing submachine guns in a steady hail, their faces set with iron determination. Bullets ripped through the monster's flesh, leaving bright red holes, but it barely staggered. Nearby, Hawkeye was propped up between two agents, pale, sweating, and clearly badly hurt. He glanced at Thor, then away, a flicker of worry passing over his features. "You can't fight this with ordinary guns," Hawkeye said hoarsely. He addressed the team, his voice thin but authoritative. "This kind of mystery needs unpredictable answers. Maintain the formation, prepare to fall back," he ordered. "Yes, sir." At the edge of the fray, Dr. Lizard stood breathing hard, a cold, sharp light in his brown eyes. The cluster of agents offered a temporary shield, but he knew how fragile that shelter was. If the monster wasn't stopped, everyone here would die. He thought of his research, of colleagues who'd given everything. The safety in front of him was only a few feet of light in an endless dark. They had to try. Chapter 227, Dead End. Deep in the labyrinth, the air was damp and rank with the metallic tang of blood. Under Hawkeye's command, the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents opened fire in disciplined volleys. Bullets peppered the creature, an obscene mountain of flesh made from writhing limbs, and where they struck, blood fountained out and slicked the walls crimson. Still, the thing's vitality was monstrous. It bled and roared, but it never slowed. Every howl bounced down the corridors like a declaration of invincibility. Dozens of heads on the living mass gaped at once, revealing blade-sharp teeth. Hawkeye's voice cut through the chaos. "Down!" His command cracked like thunder. Some men hit the cold floor without thinking, pressing themselves flat and praying. Others froze, fear locking them in place. For a heartbeat time seemed to stall. Then the creature answered with a roar so fierce it felt physical. The sound slammed into the agents like a shockwave. In an instant, those who hadn't dropped were hit with an invisible force, and the result was savage. Several heads exploded, as if struck by sledgehammers. Blood and gray matter sprayed the stones. Those who survived stared, sick with horror, as comrades were turned into a red, sticky mess. Thor's heart hammered. He'd trusted his instincts and gone prone. The roar had missed him. But when he looked up at the slaughter around him, grief and fury tore through him. He had no power. Mjolnir was gone, and the helplessness burned. Nails bit into his palms until they bled, and he hardly noticed. He had no right to sit and watch. He scrambled to his feet, grabbed a fallen agent's rifle, and opened fire. The sharp staccato of the gun woke the others. Hawkeye saw Thor and barked, "Move! Hold the line!" "Now!" The agent snapped back into action, firing into the writhing mass. Hawkeye spun and glared at Dr. Lizard, Riot, shrugging against a wall. "You're not just going to stand there, are you? If we don't stop that thing, we all die." Riot's face was a pale mask. "You want me to go claws up into that thing?" he hissed. "I'm not volunteering to be dinner." Hawkeye could see the logic. Close quarters meant certain death for anyone who engaged it directly. Still, he needed Riot to do something. His voice softened, trying to prod a contribution. At least move something big, block the passage, slow it down. The idea lit a tiny spark in Riot. He scanned the ceiling and walls for anything to use, but the chamber offered no boulders to roll. As he looked, the flesh mountain dragged itself through the hail of bullets, scooping up corpses and stuffing them into its bulk. The sight was nauseating. The creature devoured the dead like a ravenous animal. Thor's eyes fixed on the faces, more of their colleagues embedded in the monster's flanks. He realized then, with a cold stab, that those were people it had eaten. "How many did it take?" Hawkeye growled, hands trembling. Rage replaced fear. "We can't wait any longer." He turned on the agents, voice hard and steady. "Unite! Don't let it pick us off one by one." The order steadied them. Fear still clung to their faces, but they raised their weapons with renewed purpose. The maze filled with the thunder of gunfire. For a moment, courage and desperation braided into something like hope. Thor scanned the scene and felt it shred each time a round punched into the creature without dropping it. Their ordinary arms were nearly useless. He edged back to Hawkeye's side. "Do we have something stronger? Any magical gear?" he whispered. Hawkeye's eyes went wide with a bitter, incredulous look. "If we had powerful weapons, we'd have used them. We were dragged into this place without our gear. All the heavy stuff isn't with us." Resignation tipped his voice. His bow was the only long-range thing he'd managed to keep. Otherwise, they were just men with knives against a mountain. A sudden clanging distracted them. Riot had wrapped himself in a silver-gray bulk, his arms transforming, his hands becoming like sledgehammers, and jumped up. He brought both fists down hard against the stone ceiling. Cracks spidered across the rock. Dust rained onto the floor. Alarm flared in Hawkeye. If that ceiling came down, they'd be buried. "Run!" he shouted, full of urgency that cut through the fog of fear. Riot kept hammering. Time had slipped. Panic stiffened some of the agents. Thor's voice rose above the scramble. "Hey, big lizard, move! We haven't all gotten through." Riot barely glanced back, a cold smile curving his lips. In his eyes was only self-preservation. If he could clear a way for himself, he would, no matter who he left behind. Each blow loosened more stone until the whole passage trembled. Hawkeye's warning turned to a command. "Out! Now!" They ran as the ceiling finally gave way with a roar and a shower of rubble. Dust choked the air like a storm. Hawkeye and Thor burst through the opening first. The passage behind them collapsed into a jagged wall of rock. A few agents scrambled through, but many were trapped under the falling stone. Screams echoed from the blocked end, a raw, angular sound that cut through Hawkeye like a blade. "Look what you did," Hawkeye spat at Riot as they forced themselves along the tunnel. "You could have," Riot sneered without shame. "I saved you," he said. "If it weren't for me, you'd all be dead already." Those words landed like a slap. Hawkeye clutched his anger and let it freeze into a threat. "This isn't over. Next time I won't hold back." Riot's eyes flashed, but he said nothing more. Hawkeye swallowed the fury and pushed it down. There were more immediate things than retribution, like staying alive. They ran on, cramponing through the choking smoke and searching for anything that resembled safety. Thor and a handful of agents trailed after Hawkeye. Behind them, Riot moved last, his gaze flicking back along the tunnel as if already scheming. Ahead, through the gray, another figure stepped out of the haze. Thor's breath hitched. Loki? He called. It was Loki, the same one who'd fled earlier in another direction. Thor started forward with a relieved grin, arms opening to embrace him. Loki only smiled briefly, then slipped past Thor and ran onward without answering. Before Thor could process the rejection, a new sound rolled through the labyrinth, the guttural, familiar rumble of the meat mountain. Thor's stomach dropped. There wasn't just one of them. Loki had turned back because another monster blocked his escape. Thor's smile died. He watched Loki run, then spat the truth with a livid edge. "Loki, you bastard!" The sound of the approaching things filled the tunnel like a coming tide. There was no safety in sight, only more of the maze, and more of the monsters waiting at the end of the road. Chapter 228, Struggle. Loki's retreat had been exactly as Thor predicted, frantic and shameful. He fled when he ran into the horrible mountain of flesh, every step frantic as if racing from death. Anxiety gnawed at him. He wandered the dark maze, trying passage after passage, until it became clear each route was held by those creatures. They had already turned the place into their territory. The monsters weren't just numerous, they were grotesque. Limbs and faces made up their bodies, rotten flesh gleaming in the dim light. The smell made Loki nauseous, his pulse pounding, and the low, rumbling growls set his teeth on edge. He knew he could not face them alone. Doing so would end disastrously. After several failed attempts, he gave up on escaping by himself. His only hope was to regroup with Thor and the others. He slipped back into the group, trying to look composed despite his trembling inside. He forced on a smile and spread his hands as if he'd been scouting the area. "Everyone, I've checked the passages. They're not safe." Hawkeye's voice was cold and suspicious. He held his bow ready. "Who are you with?" he asked. "Is Dr. Lizard with you?" "We're not that weak," Dr. Lizard replied coolly, a trace of disdain in his tone. Loki feigned surprise and puffed himself up. "Weak? Me? Allow me to present the great god Loki." "A god?" Hawkeye sneered. "A god who ran screaming?" Thor sighed. He'd hoped Loki would stand tall, but the god indeed looked rattled. "Yes, he's a god," Thor said uncomfortably. "Actually, I'm the god of thunder, too. Well, I was. Enough. Quiet, they're coming." A low roar answered him. From the gray fog shuffled a living mountain of bodies, limbs twisted into a lumbering, obscene mass. Its breath was putrid and suffocating. A cold despair rolled over the group. Loki felt the monster's hunger like a physical thing. His palms were slick with sweat. He had never felt fear like this, not even before Odin. Still, he could not run. He had to join with the others and find a way out. "We have to keep them from closing in," Thor barked, resolve hardening his voice. Loki's hands trembled, but he spoke with forced certainty. "I can use an illusion to confuse them." Thor let out a relieved breath. They had doubts about Loki's loyalties, but there was nothing else to try. The air thickened with tension. "I'll buy you time. You find an escape," Loki said. He murmured the words of a spell, fingers painting symbols in the air. A hazy halo shimmered, like a painting melting into dream. The monster filled the corridor, its bulk nearly blocking the way. The stench hit Loki like a wall. He completed the incantation. The corridor warped as his illusion took hold. For a moment, the leading creature stopped, bewildered, sniffing and roaring as if searching for whatever had vanished. "Go, now," Thor whispered, pressing his back to the stone. They edged toward narrow gaps along the walls, breath held. The illusion seemed to work. The front creature shuddered and lost sight of them. But then an agent brushed the wall. A slick arm burst from the fissure, snaring him like a snake. He screamed, eyes wide with helpless terror. The mountain of flesh whirled and with terrible slowness seized him, stuffing him into its bloated body. His head lolled. His shrieks dissolved into a wet, ripping sound. Everyone flinched away, some closing their eyes, unable to watch. The monster's heads then opened wide in unison and unleashed a roar like a thunderclap. The shockwave hit them like a blade. Several agents doubled over, coughing blood, faces drained white. The sound was a physical assault. Ears rang, limbs went heavy. The air filled with the coppery stench of blood and a chorus of groans. Loki, however, wore a thin, satisfied smile. The sonic attack had always been the monster's undoing of his illusions. He'd expected it. He'd used his protection on his ears, allowed the illusion to draw focus, then canceled it and fled while their attention was glued to the wounded. In his mind, he'd choreographed everything. To the others, it felt like betrayal. He darted forward like a shadow, unbothered by the noise. Pride warmed him. Finally, he had an opening. But that warmth shattered when Thor's roar of fury cut through the chaos. Thor's gaze fixed on Loki's retreating back with a wounded intensity that felt like a blade. Betrayal flashed across Thor's face. The hurt in it was raw and deep. Anger flared among the others. Doctor, Lizard slammed his silver-gray coat about his shoulders and lunged at the nearest flesh mountain, his arms transforming into twin axes of savage metal. "I'm not going down," he shouted and charged. Hawkeye's eyes sharpened. He notched an arrow, the tip glinting cold. Survival narrowed their focus. Fight or die. The creature before them roared, the ground trembling at its voice. Dr. Lizard met it head-on with a collision of metal and flesh that rang through the corridor. Hawkeye's arrow sang. The battle's sounds braided into a terrible, urgent symphony. And then another cry cut through everything, sharp, desperate, intimate. "Thor, save me! I don't want to die!" Thor froze. The voice was a dagger. He turned, searching through the fog and the thrashing bodies. There, Jane. Her face, the face he had seen in 1,000 private dreams, was trapped between other faces on the living mountain like a cruel, exposed pendant. Her skin was pale, her eyes rimmed with tears, fear and hope fighting in them. She looked to him as if to the only anchor left. Thor's chest tightened, as if someone had struck him. Betrayal stung, but this was sharper still. The sight of someone innocent in such pain. Memories of her smile, her laughter, flooded him and tore at his resolve. "No, I won't let her die." The words were a vow. Every step of betrayal and anger fell away. He turned and ran for her with the force of a man who would tear the world apart to save the one he loved. The battle around him blurred into a single purpose. Blood, mud, the stench of rot, none of it mattered. Thor rushed toward the mountain of flesh and toward Jane, voice roaring, heart set. "I will save you, no matter the cost." Chapter 229. Thunder. It hurts so much. Pain dragged Thor awake. It was everywhere at once, thousands of needles pricking into muscle and bone, forcing a low, involuntary groan from him. Slowly, the haze in his head thinned and the world resolved into shape. He opened his eyes to a vast square. A thin, gray fog clung to the air, and a sickly, fishy stench rode on the wind, as if something rotting had been left out to fester. In the center of the square hovered an enormous sphere. Its surface had an irregular, greasy sheen, and it seemed to rise and fall with slow, terrible breathing. Thor's stomach turned. He tried to move and found he could not. Something invisible held him fast. He squinted, and horror filled him. The sphere was not a benign object at all, but a ball of flesh, an amalgam of countless corpses, blood, and torn flesh, stitched together into a monstrous globe. Around it were towering flesh beasts, their twisted forms and open wounds oozing filth, pressing and fusing into the sphere as if feeding it. They had been consumed and yet seemed to be sustaining it. The line between victim and body was impossible to see. A cold dread clawed at Thor's heart. He forced his eyes around and saw, close by, a grotesque face contorted in mute agony. He felt as if invisible hands gripped his chest, and his gaze fell to the closest flesh beast. Its bulk was a mass of knotted muscle and blood vessels. Seeing it made his stomach lurch. Dr. Lizard's head and tail squirmed, pinned within the beast's flanks, and Hawkeye lay pressed aside with his eyes closed, pale and motionless. Bits of memory flashed through Thor. Jane in danger, his reckless charge toward the creature, the beast's massive slap that sent him crashing, almost killing him. He had watched Dr. Lizard and Hawkeye fall in turn, pulled into that living mass. Panic swelled until it nearly drowned him. So I'm inside that thing, too? The thought pressed like a spike against his ribs. He called for Jane, but the answer was only oppressive silence. Nerves tightened. The sense of helplessness was a dark whirlpool threatening to drag him under. He struggled, but the invisible bonds would not give. Then the whole globe shivered. An unseen force pulled at him. He slid along with the motion, unable to resist. Around him, the world blurred, as if painted over with soot, and a chill wave of hatred, despair, and resentment washed into him. Unseen auras that sought to smother his will. The meatball sank deeper into itself, and Thor felt himself pulled inward with it. He could feel the dark feelings trying to make him something else, a walking corpse. No, I won't die here. I still have a name. I will save Jane. I will get out. He clung to that stubborn spark of defiance. In the press of darkness, a faint light winked, and his heart leapt at the promise of it. He reached toward the glow as if toward a lifeline, whispering Jane's name like a prayer. Minutes stretched, or perhaps it was an eternity. Blind and drifting in the void, Thor stretched out, and his hand brushed something cold and hard. The touch cut through the stupor like a lightning strike. He jolted awake to see a weapon lying in the gloom, his hammer, Mjolnir. It glowed faintly. Relief and sorrow warred in him. The hammer looked battered, its face dappled with black spots as if corroded by whatever had poisoned this place. Still, when he gripped the handle, it responded. A bright streak of lightning crawled along its head and answered his call, and a quiet, unexpected warmth unlatched something in Thor's chest. He understood then, finally, what Odin had tried to teach. Power was not only for conquest. A king must be a guardian, a shepherd of his people. The hammer had its own will. It did not exist just for striking down enemies. It directed thunder at injustice, toward protection and judgment, not toward blind domination. "Forgive me," Thor whispered to the weapon, ashamed of his earlier arrogance. "I treated you like a tool. You are more than that. You have your own purpose." He grasped the hammer tighter and pledged, "I won't make the same mistake. Come back to me, Mjolnir. I need you to save them." Something inside him, an old seal, a block of power, shattered. Divine force poured from Thor like a released tide, lightning blossoming across his skin and channeling into the hammer. The hammer thrummed in his hand, dark blots flaking away as silver light coated it anew. Power flooded him, not just the raw violence he had once loved, but a steadier, more measured authority. He remembered the worst of himself, pride, hot-headedness, and felt them cool into responsibility. He lifted Mjolnir, and in the wronged air of that place the lightning answered. The fog around them writhed as if in pain. Thor inhaled and felt thunder roll under his skin. He held his hammer high, and sparks braided into a surging sea of light that raced outward, cleansing the square. Where the thunder passed, the strange, corrupt auras were swept away. The gray miasma thinned as if rinsed. Without the control of that malign influence, the broken bodies collapsed. Some were dead, too long corrupted to be saved, but a few, briefly infected, still clung to life. Dr. Lizard and Hawkeye were among those who survived, coughing and weak but alive. In a corner, ripples of light revealed a familiar, uncomfortable figure, Loki, caught off guard. The flesh sphere at the center trembled under Thor's lightning. It shuddered, swelled, and with a savage roar erupted, exploding into a spray of limbs and gore that burst outward like a grotesque firework. Lightning poured from the rupture, bright and cleansing, and from the heart of it, a figure rose. Thor stood resplendent, armor gleaming the pale blue of stormlight, cape snapping like a phoenix's wing. He held Mjolnir. Electricity ran over him like a mantle. He was not the reckless god from before. He had been tempered, and his presence was a promise. His eyes swept the square, and then stopped on a face that made his heart lurch. "Jane," he cried inwardly, and in a blink of lightning he was at her side. He wrapped his arms around her waist, and the current of his power flowed into her, washing the remaining corruption from her body like a warm tide. Panic drained from him. Now all his focus was on healing what he could. Jane's eyes opened slowly. When she looked up at the man who had just exploded from the dark, her voice was a fragile thing, rimmed with disbelief and relief. "You, Thor?" He smiled gently, both fierce and tender. "I'm here to get you out," he said. The tone was thunder and balm all at once. Her fear softened under it, replaced by something like hope. Thor's lightning swept through the square. The filth and shadows were driven back, revealing the ruined bodies and the survivors. Those barely infected stirred, gasping. Dr. Lizard and Hawkeye, though battered, were conscious and coughing as life returned. Thor's gaze caught Loki's skulking form. He tightened his grip on Jane and flew before the trickster, frost and thunder in his eyes. "Brother," he said, cold as a winter gust, "you're here too." Loki forced a grin that didn't reach his eyes. He straightened his shoulders, and with a twist of humor that reeked of nerves, replied, "Thor, believe me, I'm here to help. I'm here to save you." Thor's jaw clenched. The storm around him hummed and waited for the answer.